Hi, can you see me? Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today, this afternoon, after some amazing presentations and thoughts shared. My name is Ellyn Walker, and I am the curator of the digital project Thresholds, which accompanies the Map of 20 celebration and gathering. I'm also an assistant on the project on the conference project as an organizing committee member, and I've been involved working on this for a number of years now. So just some orienting. We have arranged for closed captioning for this webinar. If you would benefit from this, please bring your mouse to the bottom of the screen and select live transcript. This event will also be streamed on YouTube, and we have provided the link in the chat. We encourage you to use the hashtag #MapAt20 to share your reactions and comments on social media. We begin with marking the violent histories of where we are, with making note of and reminding us of the ongoing conflicts and contradictions of this land, this water, this air. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of Credit River, and the nations of the Haudenosaunee. The place of Toronto remains the home to Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. These Americas are built on violence and erasure, and we bring these histories with us. Those native to this land, Indigenous people from other territories, as well as white settlers by conquest, and those of us who have come here by force or otherwise as a result of slavery, colonialism, and imperialism and ongoing wars. When we enter any room, even or especially virtual rooms like these, we must bring these histories into view. My colleagues at the Blackwood at the University of Toronto remind me that as we gather in virtual space, our gathering is made possible by such platforms as Zoom, which has headquarters in San Jose, California, on the traditional territories of the Muwekma-Ohlone, and Vimeo, whose headquarters are on the traditional territories of the Lenape peoples in New York and Chesterbrook and Philadelphia, respectively. There are numerous servers and network access points that traverse these Indigenous territories in order to support our gathering. Though this acknowledgement began with specificity to Toronto, the location of York University and the host of this event, we are meeting together virtually from countries around the world, each with its own histories of conquest, white settler colonialism, slavery, imperialism, and ongoing wars, and we must all also acknowledge and bring those histories and presence into view. It is with this knowledge we enter and meet here in the hopes of making a different world. So just to orient our order a bit today, I'm going to introduce this digital exhibition project and its origins and some of its research materials. And then I will introduce each of the contributors who will speak to their work and to its relationship to MAP. And then afterwards, we will have some time for audience questions, comments, and discussion. Thresholds is an online curatorial project inspired by Dionne Brand's 2001 book, A Map to the Door of No Return, Notes to Belonging. It brings together works by Mohamed, Abdulkarim Ali, Christina Battle, Sandra Brewster, Adonis Browne, Chantal Gibson, Canisia Lubrin, Cecily Nicholson, Abdi Osman, and Camille Turner. Visual artists, poets, and writers. Reflecting on this momentous anniversary of Dionne Brand's canonical text that uses the space of the doorway as schema, these contributors take up the doorway as the conceptual and aesthetic frame through which to consider questions of diaspora and belonging in settler colonial contexts like Canada and elsewhere. Here, the door of no return figures as threshold. At its core, it represents Black diasporic space. In turn, it implicates all people in histories of enslavement, dislocation, migration, and resettlement. which are tied to larger projects of white supremacy, settler colonialism, and capitalism. Thresholds offers critical listening encounters, points of relation, passages, portals, and pathways as possibilities in which new understandings of our histories and interrelations emerge. Over the past several years, I have had the pleasure of organizing and thus immersing myself in Dionne's archives, a particular kind of mapping, a particular attentive practice, a critical listening practice. Within this work, I was always led back to MAP, reading the many correspondences, notes, appendices from people and institutions all over the world who have been moved by and continue to carry MAP with them. Drawing on the exhibition as a site, mode, and form of attention, Thresholds connotes what scholar Linda Knight explains as attentiveness is thinking is tuning in, and thinking tuning in is variable and generates intense relational impacts on the field, event, phenomena. Please join me in welcoming some of the artists, poets, and writers from Thresholds, each of whom attuned into MAP on the occasion of its 20th anniversary. I will briefly introduce each panelist. However, you can find their full bios on the MAP at 20 website. Please note that artists Sandra Brewster and Camille Turner contribute to this digital exhibition project, but were unable to join us today for the panel. So I encourage you to go to the site and check out their works. Mohamed Abdulkarim Ali was born in Mogadishu, Somalia in 1985 and finds himself in Toronto today. His memoir entitled Angry Queer Somali Boy, a complicated memoir from 2019, was published by the University of Regina Press. His forthcoming book is a collection of essays about urban spaces to be published by Knopf. Christina Battle is an artist, curator, and educator based in Amishwashwashkahikan, also known as Edmonton, Alberta, within the Aspen Parkland, the transition zone where prairie and forest meet. Battle's work focuses on thinking deeply about the concept of disaster and the ways in which it might be utilized as a framework for social change. Much of this work extends from her recent PhD dissertation in 2020, which looked closer to community responses to disaster, the ways in which they shape, and especially to how online models might help to frame and strengthen such response. She collaborates with Serena Lee, a Shattered Moon Alliance, and has exhibited internationally in festivals and galleries, both as an artist and curator, most recently at the Mackenzie Art Gallery in Regina, and the Art Gallery of Southern Manitoba in Brandon, and the Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art in Colorado. Kevin Adonis Browne is a Caribbean-American photographer, writer, and speaker whose visual and written work exist at the intersection of fine art photography and memoir. He is the author of 2 books, Tropic Tendencies, Rhetoric, Popular Culture, and the Anglophone Caribbean from 2013, and High Mass, Carnival and the Poetics of Caribbean Culture, 2018. He has taught at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Bentley University, the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, and is currently an associate professor of writing, rhetoric, and composition at Syracuse University. Cecily Nicholson is the author of Triage, From the Poplars, winner of the Dorothy Livesay Poetry Prize, and Wayside Saying, which won the Governor General's Award for English Language Poetry. She volunteers with community impacted by carcerality and coordinates education and public programs with Surrey Art Gallery. Cecily was the 2021 Writer in Residence at the University of Windsor. Chantal Gibson is an award-winning writer, artist, educator living on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples. Working in the overlap between literary and visual artists, her work confronts colonialism head-on, imagining the voices silenced in the spaces and omissions left by cultural and institutional erasure. Her debut book of poetry, How She Read, Caitlin Press, 2019, explores the representation of Black women in Canadian history, art, and literature. It won the 2020 Matt Lowther Memorial Award and the 2020 Dorothy Livesay Poetry Prize, and was shortlisted for the prestigious 2020 Griffin Poetry Prize. Her follow-up collection, With/Holding, by Caitlin Press, will be published in 2021, or was just published, I believe. A recipient of the 2021 3M National Teaching Fellowship, Gibson teaches in the School of Interactive Arts and Technology at Simon Fraser University. So just a few more bios. Canisia Lubrin is a writer, editor, and critic. Her books are Voodoo Hypothesis and The Dysgraphist from 2020 and Code Noir from Knopf, coming out in 2023. In 2021, Lubrin won the Griffin Poetry Prize, the Osiem Boca's Prize for Caribbean Literature, the Derek Walcott Prize, the Wyndham Campbell Prize in Poetry, among many others. Lubrin is an inaugural Shaftesbury Writer-in-Residence at Victoria College, University of Toronto, an assistant professor and incoming MFA in creative writing coordinator in the School of English and Theatre Studies at the University of Guelph, where she completed her MFA. Abdi Osman is a Somali-Canadian multidisciplinary artist whose work focuses on questions of Black masculinity as it intersects with Muslim and queer identities. Osman's work has been exhibited in solo and group exhibitions and festivals in Canada and internationally, such as at the Art Museum at the University of Toronto, the Gardner Museum, Thames Art Gallery, the National Museum of Kenya, and the Goethe Institute in Johannesburg, South Africa. His work has been widely written about and published in academic, arts and cultural studies, journals, anthologies, books, and catalogs. So, thank you for joining me today and with this project in thinking through these many readings and relations that have emerged from MAP. As Dionne has written, we are sitting in a room with history where our inheritance in the diaspora is to live in this inexplicable space, the sea in between, thresholds. For this exhibition, I invited these brilliant and generous artists, writers, and poets to explore what Dionne writes of the door as no place at all, but a metaphor for a place. Not one place, but a collection of places. In this way, this conference gathering is a meeting place. This online exhibition is a meeting place. This panel conversation is a meeting place, all of which reflect on the importance of MAP as ongoing meeting place. Treaties represent another kind of meeting place, a nation-to-nation agreement, a model of negotiation between diverse communities. While treaties with settler nations were largely coerced, ignored, and manipulated, treaties still stand as agreements in the territories many of us speak from today, where I speak from as part of Treaty 13. The treaty, the land, the sea, the doorway, diaspora, threshold, refuge of possibility, the ethical space, forever bound to the unethical. Scholar Mark Rifkin asks, what does the spatial co-presence have to do with the flow, processes of unfolding and becoming within the experience of duration? Becoming needs to be thought of not as a break with what's come before, but as an inherent dynamism within being, in which continuity is in itself an effective activity rather than being treated simply as stasis or inertia. The rolling waves, the quiet ripples, to carry with, to carry as, to carry along with one's carrying, as Dionne reminds us. I'd like to gesture here towards our possible conversation today as part of this overarching event with words from poet-writer Assia Wadood, who also writes in her work that she is influenced by Dionne Brand. I awoke at the threshold. I have used the blueprint as a maritime future, used it as a seafaring fold. The spilling vessel, the elastic edges, the lax maps, the precedent. She asks, can you read a map? Who taught you that the good north was that? Can you spell fatal to map an abiding passage? The Fata Morgana is always superior. It senses the horizons and it laps the waters. Who taught you to read the map like that? Can you see the map? You mean the manifested frontier? The gaping sea beckons and breaks you. The impotence, the imploring, the inured, the inexact, the crisis, the crease. Port is increasingly distant. You ache for a semblance of. The vantage of this one, the proliferation. They are out of sight until they are a sightline. With these overtures, I invite you to build on Wadud's words, Dionne's map, and in its unmapping and acts of countermapping, in particular, how Wadud explains, there is a room, there is an open door, call it invitational. This is thresholds. So what I'd like to do now is to invite my colleagues and collaborators in this project and on the panel to take over and speak a little bit about their works and the work's relationship to MAP overall. So Thresholds begins with Mohamed's essay, 1-3 Centuries Removed, written exclusively for this project and event. 1-3 Centuries Removed grapples with the silences that exist between Africans on either side of the threshold to the door of no return, including the silence surrounding Somali involvement in the Indian Ocean trade networks. This essay is a foray into that subject matter. Mohamed, can you tell us more about it?
Hi, Ellyn. Thank you for having me, and thank you to Doctors Christina Sharp and Andrea Davis. As Ellyn mentioned, excuse me, I'm a little nervous. I don't know why. As Ellyn mentioned, I've always been interested in the silence between Africans on either side of the threshold. And what that's looked like for me is that upon arriving in Toronto, I had a faint notion that Somalis at one point had been part of this trade network spanning the Indian Ocean, and that we were at one point colonized. And that information was given to me largely by libraries in the Netherlands, which is where my family lived before moving to Toronto. And the maps that I was given in school, I stole my atlas and took it home, and I studied it intently. And the shapes of African countries always puzzled me. I thought, well, this country looks like a square, whereas the countries in Europe always were bound by mountain ranges or rivers and had more, quote unquote, normal seeming boundaries. And so initially I went looking for why these lines were this way, and come to find out that all of these histories, which again were passed on to me through the European library, were things we didn't talk about at home. And so I was just left with this information. There was almost no one I could talk to about this, including the Caribbean people who lived amongst us in both the Netherlands and in Toronto. In the Netherlands, people tended to hail from Suriname, Curacao, and Aruba. And, and many of their ancestors had come to those places by the Middle Passage. And there was a great deal of silence on their part. And there was unwillingness on the part of Africans who had landed in the Netherlands to even broach how that journey began and what our involvement was in that. And so coming to Toronto, I was about 15, and many of my classmates had come from islands in the Caribbean. and many of them were quite forthcoming. And they didn't so much level an accusation so much as state a fact, which was Africans were part of the reason why my ancestors found themselves in a place like Jamaica or Trinidad or Grenada. And so I started to think about Africans who found themselves on the other side of the Indian Ocean, because I imagined, the countries that are today Ghana or Nigeria or Togo or Angola couldn't have possibly been the only ones on the map to have participated in this. And another thing that I was aware of was that this trade primarily benefited Europeans. And when I went searching for the Somali involvement in this practice, again, I was met by silence. This was in part because the Somali culture up to a certain point in our history had been oral, and until recently, much of it had not been written down, but only passed on. And what the Civil War did to us was to sever the connection for many of us to that oral tradition, because many of us found ourselves in European locales or North America or Australia, unable to speak the language of our ancestors. And so there were these many different kinds of silences, the silence between my parents and I, between each other in the community, between the Somali and African communities and the Caribbean communities, and the communities of African Americans in the United States. And whenever I did bring up the subject of our history to my elders, I was met with initially not silence, but I was told not to go digging for things that would bother me or bother them. They felt troubled by what had happened in Somalia. They felt troubled by the failure of our post-colonial dream. And I was merely adding to that weight. And so, again, I found myself in the library alone and with these maps. And the wonderful thing about a place like the library is that it guides me to writers like Dionne Brand. And it was in reading her book that my questioning finally found a responsive partner. She was able to suggest that there is a silence for a reason, but that our landing here, mine was not violent in the same way that it was for Black Americans or people from the Caribbean, but that our residence here allows us to negotiate what our future can look like. That I can turn to my neighbors and perhaps start a dialogue that may hold promise for what we can accomplish in the future, and that a future that's illuminated by the truth can make a lot more sense of that silent past. And that's what I'm excited about. It's been a difficult road, but I'm hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohamed. So I'm just going in the order of how artworks appear on the website in the digital project. All this is to say that this panel and the conversations we're having are not meant to replace the exhibition. So please do visit it and spend time with the works. So next after Mohamed in the exhibition is Christina Battle. Christina Battle's ongoing project called Exercises in Trust, begun in 2020, has been expanded upon for this occasion. Christina created 3 new exercises featured on the Threshold site, which links back to her broader project, Exercises in Trust. The series offers and considers the question, can collective reading, when performed across distance, turn into a sort of spell? Described by Christina as a sort of reading group from afar, Prompts include the following. Participate in as many or as few of the prompts as you like. Repeat exercises as needed. Try them alone or with friends at a safe distance. From MAP, she cites, I am constructing a map of the region, paying attention to faces, to the unknowable, to unintended acts of returning, to impressions of doorways. One of many passages she draws from. Christina, can you tell us more about this work and the new exercises that you created for Map of 20?
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Ellyn and everyone for the invitation. It feels really amazing to be joining all of you here and to be a part of this really thoughtful and inspiring exhibition. I'm speaking to you now from Amiskwaciwâskahiwan, which is in Treaty 6 territory. And I'm gonna share in the chat a link. Let me make sure I'm not cutting and pasting anything weird. A link to the website, which is included in the Thresholds exhibition. So part of this project is really focused on thinking about how it is that we might participate and engage and encourage things online at a distance with one another. I developed the project initially when I was invited to do an exhibition at the MoCA, which is a gallery in Boulder, Colorado. And there's, a typical sort of gallery exhibition with videos that are filling up the space. But I was initially supposed to do something more relational with the community there, sort of workshop or something that engaged in conversation with others. And then, of course, because of the pandemic, I wasn't able to travel to Boulder. So I started to really think through how this might become an opportunity for thinking about how to still do things relationally with others, but at a distance. And a lot of my work looks to the potentials of the online and online spaces and how we might pull from that potential, map it, and utilize it as a way to sort of build further support for communities offline. And even as a way to sort of maybe better think through what we mean when we say community in the first place. Who are we in community with? Who do we want to be in relation with and to? And like Ellyn said, I think about it like a sort of distanced reading group. And I really hope that it's something that's taken up by others as a way to also support them creating their own circles of engagement or community. So on the About page, which is continually sort of evolving and morphing, there's a list of things that I was thinking about in terms of how I situate the project. I'm going to read a little bit from it here to give you a sense. So some of the things I was thinking about: world building through creative participation, reading together across distance, participation and responsibility, collective summonings, reading closer again and again, citation as relation, and on and on. And the project centers readings and writings that have been really critical for me across recent years, especially, and readings and things that I was really leaning on in life and in my own research, and readings that I really wanted to spend more time with, and also to encourage others to really spend time with or to be introduced with, to really sit with some of the words that I was reading and gaining so much from over the year. And some of Dionne Brand's wonderful writing was included in that first iteration of the project. And then when I was invited to think about a map to the door of no return, I really loved this idea of sort of sitting with one singular text and really thinking about how it might also be included into this collective reading, distanced reading group. So there are 3 new prompts that are added specifically from that book. And maybe I'll share a link in a second to on the Threshold websites. There's direct links where you can access those particular prompts for those 3 new inclusions. And I was really interested in thinking about how the idea of maps that's evoked through the text can really help us trace lines from the past through memories and on into the future, and how they also help locate us in the here and now and on this land now as well. So thanks so much. I'm going to share a link.
Great, thank you, Christina. So I believe that link is in the chat and it's also on the Threshold site. In between Christina's work and the next artist is Sandra Brewster. Sandra Brewster's 2017 work, We Gather, was modified for Thresholds for this occasion. In it, a child narrates her experiences of attending Toronto's Carabana, the Carnival Festival, historically born in slavery and out of emancipation, held along University Avenue during the 1980s. She shares particular memories and feelings that resonate with many people, represented here through a charcoal drawn animation of figures gathering in space and filling the frame. So I'm wondering now, Michelle, can you play Sandra's piece on the Threshold site, please?
My mother hustles us together and dresses us in comfortable, cool clothing. She makes sure the laces of our running shoes are tied tight and our bellies are full before heading out. It is the first weekend of August, and like every year, we are on our way downtown to celebrate in the streets for Carabana. For that entire Saturday afternoon on University Avenue, people fill the streets from sidewalk to sidewalk. Loud calypso and soca erupt from gargantuan speakers of sound systems, heavy on top of glitter-laden truck platforms elevated up high. Many of these trucks carry live bands, backed up by dancers, followed by a troupe of revelers. From above, I'm sure we look like a colony of a zillion ants bouncing up and down, all heading in the same direction. The colors are intensely vibrant. The feathers from costumes wildly sway back and forth, so high that they sweep the bellies of clouds above. People wear masks twisted and contorted into exaggerated expressions, and large-scale wire sculptures juk upwards in rhythm to the sound of the steel pan. We all move together. We all move south. The major streets have their own side movements. Up, down, up, and down, as people enter and exit the college, Dundas, Osgood, and St. Andrew subway stations. If they're not exiting or entering, they're simply looking for a roti or a dish of cook-up on the sides and corners of the streets. Food, necessary to keep up one's energy for the jump-up that is the parade. At some point, in between the greeting of family and friends, the nibbling of a patty, and Mom hollering at us to follow along, my sister and I escape into the throngs of people following the bands. Each person is situated very close to the next person. And while the bodies move to the music, I could feel mine rise. A slow, eventual ascent. Upward. There are times when my feet are not even touching the ground. Amazed, I laugh and simply enjoy being carried by the crowd.
Great, thank you, Michelle. So next, we have Kevin Adonis Browne, whose photographic series Russo Locks from 2014 follows. Originally published in Brick in 2019 to accompany the essay Prelude to a Memory of Dominica, Kevin describes this work as a meditation that relies on a series of deliberate transpositions of gazes, personal understandings of them, and their eventual disintegration that he argues are only possible as I walk through a Caribbean city, Rousseau, Dominica's capital. Photographed in 2014, the series considers anonymity, memory, and the ineffable silences that exist in and between everyday thresholds that one may see but never touch, pass but never enter, unless or until one returns. So I'd like to welcome Kevin to speak to his work in the project.
Thank you so much, Ellyn. Greetings, everyone. The weekend I first received A Map to the Door of No Return, I was chastised by another author for being sentimental in my work, which I don't mind or apologize for, because this particular series exists in part because I had to create some work that that really was because Dionne Brand asked me to. So, so this is sentimental for me, and I do feel a bit nervous sharing it publicly for the first time reading, but I think perhaps when I do read it, it will become a little bit clearer how I try to situate my understanding of A Map to the Door of No Return as an experience, and how I try to tie my own experience to creating work that responds in some ways to it. Sitting as you often do in doorways, you understand that it doesn't take long before every rectangle you encounter begins to look like a door. A piece of sheet metal, a tent, a road sign, a grave. The ubiquity of doors invites you to think about the paths that lead to them. Taking the door as invitation, your reflection on the path that leads to it is evidence of your acceptance. Doors don't challenge you to do anything. They don't demand anything more of you, except perhaps the sign that always demands, that almost demands that you read it, but does not demand, only invites. The absence of a sign that does not demand you guess, but only invites you to guess. And how do you, once invited, learn finally to invite yourself? What do you invite yourself to do? This is a Caribbean city. No place so eager to outpace its past that it marks time with an insistence so fierce it buries itself where it should long have taken root. It will take a step in some cosmopolitan direction, but will not stay. Unless you walk in a Caribbean city, you will not only think you know what love is, what loss feels like on a scale beyond the singular borders of your body, beyond the instinctive concern for your own preservation, but you do not know. It is only after perfecting the pounding staccato of domino tiles on old varnished tables that you will begin to feel like you belong in this city by the water. Between losing, then winning, among the drunk and the sober, you remember that there is no place on earth like where you are. Too early for the hard rum, we nail shut the various victories and disappointments collected throughout the day and commit our losses to silent nods, black bottles, a cigarette near the door. A guild of diggers and builders, teachers and thieves, an elegy. Only there, among the hundreds who ignore you and your awkward questions, among those you can be comfortably invisible with, where you and your newfound people can be silent by force and disruptive by choice as you grind yourselves to dust, where you wait for a carnival like only those who believe in resurrection can wait, where you can endure the pathology of belonging with smatterings of grace that stain your spirit like canal water on a shirt or sheet or blouse blown off its line. Only then will your unanswered love find its measure, no place on earth, no place else on earth. In a Caribbean city, there is nothing so open as a locked door, nothing so obvious and vulnerable as its memory of wishing it were more than it is. Every allegory is here. In the peeling paint, the rusted mesh, there was your shipwreck and your sugar, your history in broken hinges. I wonder, what is a locked door to a passerby who knows better than to go in? You can only fall out of love in a city like this. A city like this can only leave you, even though having grown tired of taking your time in chipped enamel cups, it is you who will walk away from it. Thank God for that. Though you know only atheists can thrive here, give thanks. Our pains done too well can look like art. Hurt, a kind of privilege. Neglect, an ironic luxury. But there is nothing to lose in a city like this. To walk in a place where all you can do is fall out of love is to love that place more completely, without condition or expectation. To be lost in it is a prayer answered, even if you cannot pray in this unforgiving heat. What time you think you have in this city you found is no longer yours. No, your time still courses through your bluish veins, making its way through your half-open heart, your overthinking brain, bound for forgetting as it escapes your pores and your panting steps. This city, you will find, has no owner. It is you who belong to it. In time, you will become one of its open secrets, always as busy as our shame will allow. Stop for a minute. Have a drink at the bar on the corner of somewhere and something. Listen to the expats boast of knowing your city because they see their bones in the cobblestone and brick. Do not complain. Soon you will find the dominoes drummers drumming. Your fury will find the accompaniment it seeks. You will know the song and will sing the lyrics aloud. In time, you will write some of your own. In time, you will dance to it like a blackbird. Until then, you let your tongue confess. Say, I did not want to think about the metaphorical journey, the metaphor without the privilege of actually being on one. Because I know the connection is physical. The material offers a connection as important as the psychic. Confess to enacting the possible by doing the impossible thing, by doing all of these things together, sitting with them, simultaneous and singularly. The ghost, perhaps, of nothing that haunts you. Of course, this is only you trying not to haunt yourself. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kevin. Next, we have Chantal Gibson's work, Yet There Is All This, which was initiated in early 2021 when she began writing Withholding, a collection of poetry about the representation of Blackness across digital media. Simultaneous to this, Chantal started working on a tapestry, hand sewing, twisting, braiding black cotton thread into rubber mesh. Much of this work was done in isolation, sometimes silence, sometimes a YouTube talk in the background. However, all of it was done in conversation with Black thinkers, writers, artists, and scholars who have informed her work-life practice for over 20 years, most notably Dionne Brand. So I'd like to invite Chantal to speak to her work and to map.
Hi, thank you, Ellyn, and thank you, everyone. I'm coming to you from Kakite territory here in BC on a rainy afternoon. I guess we're not going to show the video. It's almost 9 minutes long, and so, of course, we don't really have time for that. I guess what I wanted to speak to is, this experience of coming back to MAP after 20 years and feeling the first time that I read it when I was in grad school that I wasn't ready. There was something about that book that a Black space by a Black writer about Black folks, and the level of, depth and inquiry. It's a book that I have returned to many, many times. And so it was really just an exercise in connection that I started creating this tapestry in early 2021 and spending too much time alone and in COVID. And I would just play lectures by Black thinkers, writers, listen to actors. And somehow for me, that was a way of building connection. But I was listening to a conversation with Dionne Brand and Torkwase Dyson. It was Dionne Brand's lecture, The Shape of Language, that something about that talk, it just really resonated with me. And so you will hear Dionne Brand speaking at the beginning of my digital tapestry, and that is the epigraph. And there's this lovely moment near the end of this lecture where Dionne Brand talks about, as she's closing, she says, many years ago, I wrote this book, and then she pauses, there's a caesura, and that like she's remembering that she wrote the map to the door of no return. And there's this wonderful lightness in the room. And so what that did is it made me, think about, Blackness in the sense of joy and the ums and the ahs and the call and response. And so when you hear that piece, you hear this lovely dialogue between Dionne Brand and Torkwase Dyson. And I think that the piece embeds those voices. So for me, MAP really is about a space of continually coming to a place of belonging and understanding. I'm just going to read a few poems from my book. Instead of talking about my process, I think it's just better if I read a couple of these, and you can see how that book is constantly working on me. I have a poem that I want to read to you called Trolling Cape Coast Castle. I was introduced to Cape Coast Castle through Map to the Door of No Return. Now, as a teacher who, interrogates the world through the use of technologies that we didn't even have 20 years ago, I can't help but meditate on those spaces. So I'm just going to read this to you, and you'll kind of get a sense of my work and my practice. I will say that reading is a place for me of discovery and belonging. And in doing this poem, I met an artist, Kwame Okoto Bamfo, a Ghanaian artist, who has a series of sculptures, ancestor sculptures, that tries to imagine the lives and experiences of those who would become enslaved, and the richness of experiences that of people making their way to Cape Coast Castle. So that's how this ends. Trolling Cape Coast Castle. I've memorized the tour guide's script, mapped the route start to finish. Now I follow the tourists, slip in behind them when no one's watching, and assume the spot behind someone else's camera, just to see where the lens will take me. No route seeker, no homecomer, no cultural anthropologist. I embed myself amongst the descendants of slaves and slave traders, a jaded spirit, and watch them take it all in, the narrative, a brief history of fluids, piss, shit, vomit, menstrual blood, beatings, rapes, and unwanted pregnancies, the death, dying, letting go. I watch them aim their phones in the dark when the guide raises his hand to mark the exact height of human excrement and wait for the flicker. A tiny seizure before the burst, the algorithm wondering what's worth seeing here before it fills the dungeon with automatic flash. Most nights I just scrub through the holding cells, cross the cobblestone courtyard by the sea, and pass through the door of no return, the museum, the coffle, the hold, the slave ship diagram, the auction block, and whipped Peter. just to get to the gift shop. Sometimes I follow celebrities to see who mourns best. I leave behind 2 crying emojis, a row of black fists, and a comment rating our Ghanaian guide on his knowledge, delivery, and good English. Tonight, the camera bypassed the church. My tour ended in 2017 in a yellow room with peeling walls and white plinths, atop each one a cement head. Nsodi, a young Ghanaian artist drawing on the Akan tradition of creating portraits of the dead, ancestors drawn from the memory of the Black diaspora, noses, lips, and eyes in varying states of swollen, each one fashioned more or less with a neck. One looks confused, one looks parched, one looks remorseful, one looks shocked, one looks ashy, one looks a little short-sighted. One looks left, one looks right, one looks a bit shifty, one looks up, one looks down, one looks undecided. One looks pale, one's out of breath, one's got a migraine, one's epileptic, one's catatonic, one's in cardiac arrest. One's been duped, one deserves an apology, one thinks there's been a misunderstanding. One's lost sight of a child, one's looking for the nearest exit. One thinks mama's still in back, one thinks she may be just up ahead. One thinks this is some bullshit. Pissed, betrayed, disappointed, looking at me like, girl, please, go to sleep. You don't have better ways to spend your time? Another aspect of reading, sorry, I'm just finding my page here. Reading Map to the Door of No Return is one of the things I appreciated was how the writer used contemporary news articles and was taking up issues of the day and somehow turning those into beautiful prose. And so that has greatly influenced my practice. And so I just like to read a poem for you that was really inspired by work from MAP. This is called State-Sanctioned Violence. And it's in response to the ongoing blackface images that we see of Justin Trudeau. State-sanctioned violence, epigraph. Asked if he thought the photograph was racist, he said, yes, it was. I didn't consider it racist at the time, but now we know better. Time magazine, September 18th, 2019. It's not the photograph, it's the lens. It's 2001, the new millennium, the future, a private school gala, Arabian Nights, a fairy tale fundraiser, a few bucks short on imagination. It's the subject, a 29-year-old man, a white man, a high school teacher, son of a prime minister, a workplace function, a turban and blackface, clearly a white man without black friends. It's the composition, the face, neck, and hands, the careful attention to coverage, right hand over her shoulder, just so sure of itself, like a West Van lady's artisanal necklace, creeping over the breastbone, grinning white teeth, left hand hovering at her waist. It's the setting, all the gathering around, the chit chat and speeches, all the posing just outside the frame, a night of withholding, a telltale sign no one asked, don't you think that's racist? No one whispered, dude, look around, there's brown folks here, wash that shit off or go the fuck home. It's not the photograph, it's the white balance. It's not the black face, it's all the white masks underneath. I'd like to end with a short poem that one of the other takeaways from MAP that I think about continually is being a good ancestor now. And so this poem is called EMT, Emancipation Modification Therapy. And it's about an image that we see continually in Black History Month documentaries, carte de visite of a former slave. It's taken in 1850, whose back is heavily scarred. And this person is known as Gordon, or sometimes known as Whipped Peter. So Dionne Brand has taught us a lot about being good ancestors now. Dear Gordon, or is it Peter? Today I Googled Whip Peter and got 8,230,000 hits in 0.89 seconds. I found out Will Smith will be playing you in an action thriller called Emancipation, based on a true story fueled by that indelible image. I downloaded the carte de visite from your wiki, the abolitionist calling card, still circulated widely in the public domain. I know you can't fix the past. I can only imagine what they'll do to you with a budget. I have no use for nostalgia, but I am your descendant, here to remind you of the past, to make you whole. I want you to know I photoshopped your back, removed each tally mark with the eraser tool, restored your skin with a clone stamp, and touched you up with the healing brush. I combed your hair and oiled your scalp and rubbed a little cocoa butter on your shoulders. A little salve or a bit of salvation. I pray I've done you no harm. May that all signifying star, the untethered keloid of our mean remembering, find a new sky and hold its place in a kinder, loving universe. May you carry a lighter burden, if only for a little while, and find some relief from a lifetime of Februaries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chantal. So next in the project is Canisia Lubrin. Her piece is called What New Map? It's a new piece for this project, so it's from 2021. What New Map is a poem imagining thresholds and their diasporic invitations, taking cues from Dionne Brand's A Map to the Door of No Return. The accompanying audio recording was edited by Joaquin David. So I'd like to hand it over to Canisia, and also I think Michelle will be showing and playing the poem.
Ellyn, thank you so much for this good fortune of gathering us around a map to the door of no return. As you've explained, the poem was written for the exhibition, and it attends to the tension between what coheres and what is impossible, such as the map, the door, the eye, which is the organ of perception that makes language into threshold in poetry. So Michelle, do your screen thing, please. Thank you. What new map? 1. According to water. Suppose howls like thresholds spread, as well as any virus while we are water over stone. While only a child sees the wind swell into birds, any speech worth any start, all signs we exist in the same earth, swept into a dust pile behind the door. In the black, we sail from the blue hills shake, with the animals' appetites, with all life, an assumption of lime. We enter, grow farther from dirt. We, though untrained for this life, like the garden's new nakedness, stretch into engines, into kindling, into horns, music as ruffle of silk. Soundless, we go as cotton, verdigris, a diet of fruit and alarm. Two, according to fire. wind calls the nose. The shape we the living rope for herdswomen no one sees, for doctors who beach in crop time, thickening groin thickness, loosed beside a druggist, one undertaker, some mothers asleep along a way, to hulls we had refused to empty once, calling ourselves flame. Sickly again, we are knotted by singing. In the corners of our swift heads, we are slanted, we crumble roads before the argument of marshes. History's fevers us making our invisible descents nearer to evening. We give back the hedges, touching our wanting ends to a bevy of words, filed on the edge of nightfall, in the blind chasm, as though the world should begin elsewhere, where we are flame, in a halved night already haunted by the search. Three, according to the tree. The shade, strong with its leaves, suture us to see when we are limp and funereal, and the dog barks its quarter of the earth to burning, and we live longer than flesh, longer than the old sugar mill, with the faded memo addressed to the kerosene days, falsehoods longer than need stitching us to the hidden cities the woods wear like light, like forename, love's tyranny, like echoes potent enough, slower to iron, rusted now. A tree exists only to tempt the water, because we cannot meet our dead among the ears sparked with ribbons. These marrows along the coast, feeble as bark, tapped to maps, engorged and crusting their own hearts. With little to hear here, we spread, where everything has its season, where the map and the tree are soon like tongues, are spilled topographies naming something else. Four, according to the door. Suppose a girl traces, touches the place of a door in its act of closing our blue-penciled lives. We careen, hold air, water, seaside, mammals that disappeared. If our plea for wings, for the watered people homed in our livers, could not refuse even light. What bareness could know us, by paper and bone, by currents, by more? Suppose our lives litter. Suppose we magnitude 7.3 and pocketless, can soon be swiped, can pass without injury between these infrastructures of ghosts, boats from which one or two of us break rain, and we can name 12 compasses, harping 500 knocks on our doors. Life, as time spent with names, turned to bury in the windswept years. Five, according to Stone. A country overhears two fault lines, as the world cuts its keys on the least we've known, on our coming back shorn from the limits of our non-existence. While we sleep, Haiti eats any line that speaks. Bayanola, look how we search and pity. Look how we whirled and embrace. And now, pass among us and our new friends. Look how we storm and gripe the deep drum of you. When they come, crown them with a coffin for your daring, another for your light, another yet for your eye that never closes. What is rest here to the girlhood fury you were? Six, according to the road. When of course to close a bend, at the approach of these stranded others, an eye met with Lassie, another with a story from Colombo, brushed on lavish cotton, hardening the sea, oceans must wreck all windows pocked with condensate. All these ways following exile, ebullient, following the blue maroon. Suppose these sentences cliff again, with everything already gone. Come, patch a mile with our bellies, simple and violent here. Seven, according to the mouth, with silence as musical as science, let us in, portraitist. Nobody is allegory here. The map distrusts the photograph, as any force would imagine itself pressed into mark. We know what rupture, what blossom, what again is a pencil's sharpening, if not a voice, a note. We hear breathe its leaden life in the middle of a sentence, beyond a skull trapping our sound. Cyst-like, a single screw welded to a graphite bell, our dull memory, counterpoint, the opening. From Soufriere to Cape Town, we canvas for Jouvert. Eight, according to the brush. The road uphill is like a crooked easel. A mule-like woman throws at the sky. A wood reused since 1 century was new to folding the smalling world in two. Or any ordinary tall closer to gust and firefly would bury these crimes that sleep with us and themselves. Tell the organ that knows me best, is over there I gone? Is the ciel I want, around this geography of somebody I love? Black and all careworn, like my hair, pulled to gray for myself. How to say I see, and hello, as if my foot, an hour ago my hand, must no longer turn the daily oar. Ferocious as this we close, and then scatter into life. Nine, according to Cloud. If the language of rains is the sky, passioned for the next decade, and the children must have their turns, now, who will be first to draft tomorrows we rouse with wet feet, stiffen this gravel, with fingers rooting out more evenings, melting earth holes, like 4 small meanings or needs. If another of us must bear the morning into a picture for somebody's gallery of grief, suppose a son learns fire by coming to this sea again, learns fire by boiling into the cold, the animal of day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Canisia. So next is Cecily Nicholson, whose piece Collection of Places, Rain Falls to Ocean from 2021. These poems are about movements rural, urban, flattened in a moment some 30 years ago. Reading through lost bearings and fragments, births and practices have manifest. The work contributes anti-pastoral notes on farm and the outdoors. Welcome, Cecily.
Thank you, Ellyn. Thank you. I'm so honored to be a part of this gathering. I'm really grateful for the invitation to be here today. I'm also joining you from Kikite territory. This is the traditional waterways and the seasonal gathering grounds for the Kwantlen, Katzie, and Musqueam peoples as well. I'm in view of an incredibly powerful river known by many as the Stolo. And from this temporary residency, we continue to strive to undermine the indecent haste of colony and settler colonial futures. I really appreciate the kind provocation that you advanced for our conversation today, Ellyn, with Wadu's sentiment in general, but this particular line, that there is a room, that there is an open door, and call it invitational. I am ever grateful for the open doors, rooms, windows. My work for Thresholds is just 4 poems. This is distilled from many pages of work, I suppose, that fit within a broader project, a much larger work that I'm trying to sift through. I am subject to the work, and it is on a material practice, and the material practice is farming. As I recall the tensions of being out of place on land that underscored my rural upbringing and the places that I've left, in prolonged leavings, spaces and times of containment and entrenchment, of violence, an involvement, multiple involvements in systems that I left 30 years ago to become emancipated miner. 30 years ago, I began reaching for literature that would help me unravel the internalized provincial, local, national, institutional, patriarchal, etc. selves, troubled selves that I needed to unravel. I consider the colonial tract of farm and cultivated space now and throughout this pandemic as a volunteer at a so-called prison farm. And this is a space, I'll speak briefly, is an aspiring organic farm, non-spray enterprise that's led by formerly incarcerated people, women, queer and trans people, including Black and Indigenous people. A farm whose laborers, for the most part, however, have remained mostly inside prison, intermittently on actual lockdown, not a metaphor, bereft of meaningful relationships and relations to land for some time. This place for me has also been the base of a kind of recovery as I've reallocated my labor, in some ways moving away from non-institutional programs within the context of prison, which I've been working with a number of wonderful people and groups through the years, this past decade, as well as with formerly incarcerated people and people reincarcerated and constantly impacted by policing and structures, mainly in this city for the last 20 years. So while supporting a struggling space and all these whatever goals that I imagine I have also, for the first time in a very long time, been able to still a rattling kind of state of mind, to free a cooped up body. And it's been a very new experience being in a generative relationship to this idea of farm. It's allowed me to think about it for the first time in a real way. It has also led to the recovery and the distillation of memory. And I've been able to do this connecting to a life 30 years and 40 years, 50 years almost ago, while I've been learning and relearning how to grow food from seed to my mouth, to my kitchen. And I'm reminded how what I tends to me. So this work in relationship to MAP, as it's been shorthanded today, so I'm going to borrow from that. It's also in relationship to the body of work that Dionne Brand has brought. I've had a hard time separating it out. And it's been very hard, I'm sure I'm not alone, to put to words a response to this text. I quite admire all the incredible efforts I'm hearing more about today and the outcomes of this gathering. So I admire you all. Still, it's been very difficult to put to words a good response to the critical work of a writer whose poetry I once held in my lap as a teenager, on a Greyhound bus out of Huron-Perth County, to the highways, to North York, where I began university. Well, actually to the terminal off Dundas Street, and then to the subway, and then to the bus again, and a walk to Tobermory Crescent. So I'm sure the routes are different now. It's been a long time, and I've never returned. But in this current instance, the 4 poems imagine a kind of method in collections of places. They have parsed through map in a study and a search for farm and rural, relating to the awkward impossibility of ever being from town. The poems relate as a kind of fiction, what I recollect, what enters my dreams, the psychic renting, giving a profound loss, given the profound loss of bearings, to string together 3 phrases that make a lot of sense to me. I am able to read a self into the present, into existence then and now, as a result of this work and works like it. Cycling again, this particular set of poems cycles again and again. Quote, to the door as the place of the fall, taking up the seasonal fall, autumn as a Black rurality where I existed then and still now, outdoors and beyond urban. And so through doorways and this cognitive schema as a conceptual and aesthetic frame through which to consider questions of diaspora and belonging are welcome. The poem strives to hold real relations with people and places where food manifests, and facing directly the fact of Black migration that cycles into the context of precarious workers that groceries depend upon, our groceries depend upon. And while a nation state refuses safety, good housing, and the rights of citizenship to those workers, and globally in the production of food and industry that's embedded in empire and the maldistribution of property everywhere. So herein I pinpoint an existence alongside or corresponding for urgent everydays amid global processes, amid biomes. 30 years ago, landlocked and broken off ground gave rivulets and evaporation, poetry of rain that eventually found its way 20 years now ago for me to the ocean, oceans that I could hardly conceive of for my life, and I am awed and mystified still by. And so just in parting, my thoughts are about remembering, yes, all the harried departures from a kind of life 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and the reading of a telling of possible worlds and how those worlds floated somehow outward and beyond me, and how we were able, or I was able, to move towards these. How do we think on mapping this moment of movement and mobility as it relates to current conditions of entrenchment and confinement? The struggle for imagination to dream and to forecast futures as a lifer incarcerated or otherwise bound to a place. How do we collectively reach each other, really? And I think there's many beautiful efforts and answers to that. Running, present still on land, looking as pinpoints, marks, map, as specks of distant stars and relations. I'm really grateful to be a part of this gathering. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Cecily. Just being mindful of time, I don't want to leave anyone out. We still have to hear from Abdi Osman, but I also wanted to briefly speak to Camille Turner's work, which you can find on the Threshold site. It's a work called Awakenings from 2020, and it is a film that presents a conversation that takes place in the future on a spaceship. So the link for that is on the site. Next, I'm going to introduce Abdi Osman, whose work Gardens of the Mediterranean from 2018 recalls ways in which human and more than human life has been forcefully transposed across vast lands and waters. Quiet scenes of the wind blowing in a woman's hijab as she sits alone facing the water are juxtaposed with images of other international waters, together creating richly textural scenes through the pacing of single and two-channel video montage. A text by Somali-Italian poet and scholar Uba Christina Ali Farah overlays the images of water, lending diasporic voice to the storying of migration across waters and territory. So welcome, Abdi.
Thank you, Ellyn. And thank you for all the organizers of Dionne Brand's Map to the Door of No Return. I'm going to be deliberately brief since we're running out of time. So this work is a collaboration between myself and the writer Christina Ali Farah, and it centers on Somali relations to the sea, movement, and living. It finds itself in dialogue with Brand's map as both a relationship to Blackness and how African still remains shaped by the ship and the sea. In Brand's map, the sea figures and repeats over and over. So my work speaks to this relation between Black diasporic people and our relation to seas, to living, to how it haunts our lives, both historically and present. My work is a part of a dialogue about the figure of the sea in Black life that Brand writes about, and in dua form, as in Somali we say dua fashion, calls our dead back to us. One question I'm still asking is how the sea continues to shape Black realities, Black experiences, and therefore Black art making and aesthetics. This is the question I'm still thinking about, and maybe you can join me in thinking about it too. So I welcome you to go and see the clip, actually see the video, short film, which is on the website on the website, yeah. So go and see it, and that's it.
Quando morì mia nonna, erano molti anni che non la vedevo, per questo non piansi quando morì a Ellyn, dove era sempre vissuta. Piuttosto rimasi sorpresa, poiché la stessa notte, quella della sua morte, l'avevo sognata, ed era la prima volta da quando vivevo in Europa che mia nonna mi compariva in sogno. Anzi, si può dire che non mi comparisse affatto, e improvvisamente l'avevo sognata, proprio la notte della sua morte. Nel sogno mia nonna sciacquava le stoffe nel mare ed era seria, come sempre è stata seria nella sua vita. A risveglio l'avevo ricordata seria com'era, dritta e dura come un fusto, il guantino stretto in vita, un fazzoletto rosso sulla nuca. Era un ricordo simile a una fotografia in posa, poiché mia nonna non si muoveva, rimaneva fissa su una lunga pertica. Intorno aveva il mare, anche se il mare lei l'aveva sempre odiato. Avevo un'amica all'epoca e le raccontai del sogno e della nonna. Non lo raccontai in modo speciale, né cerimonioso né drammatico. Raccontai solo cosa era avvenuto e la mia amica rimase un poco in silenzio e poi disse in modo speciale e cerimonioso e drammatico che ci doveva essere un grande legame tra me e mia nonna se avevo fatto quel sogno. Io pensavo al legame e pensavo che forse era inopportuno non avere un legame ed era inopportuno che mia nonna comparisse dopo tanto tempo in sogno. Allora la chiamai e vidi di nuovo l'oceano come lo vedevo da bambina e sentii di nuovo i demoni nascosti in mezzo agli scogli sibilare il mio nome. Corsi lontano senza girarmi, con il mio nome in bocca. Corsi dove gli incensieri erano accesi e i ginni non mi potevano afferrare. L'avevo chiamata e mia nonna si era allontanata dal mare perché lei non l'amava e mi aveva mostrato la strada per salire a Il Dawat, nascosta tra le valli, poco distante dalla Il Badei costiera, da cui oggi salpano i pirati. Indicava il villaggio in cui mio padre era nato, quello in cui prometteva sempre di portarmi. Lo indicava tutto, e un fiume l'attraversava, e c'erano animali e latte in abbondanza. Il suo villaggio a un monte non aveva a che fare con il mare. Mia nonna si allontanava dal mare e sembrava ancora tenere la primogenita stretta al petto, mentre raccontava del giovane marito naufragato sul Sambuco. Dondolava le braccia e cantava una canzone che sanno tutti. Un sambuco attraversa il mare, un sambuco attraversa il mare, porta incenso e mirra, porta incenso e mirra. Da Il Badei partivano vascelli carichi di pelle e di animali, tornando colmi di datteri e di riso. Suo marito era un giovane commerciante, perito in mare quando mia nonna aspettava la sua prima bambina. E nella stessa El, nascosta tra le colline, era nato anche mio padre, il cui nome è Aftabel, bocca di vento, per la memoria prodigiosa nella voce. Non era nato nella mia Mogadiscio di case bianche, bianche come ossa spolpate, simili a relitti sulla costa. A Mogadiscio mia nonna giungeva solo in visita, perché lei non avrebbe mai lasciato El, non avrebbe mai lasciato la sua casa, non avrebbe mai lasciato il villaggio fresco tra le colline, ricco d'acqua e di animali. Io non ero mai stata in quel villaggio, né visto la sua casa, né nuotato nel suo ruscello. Avevo solo pianto un mattino per la mancata promessa di mio padre, partito a mia insaputa per il nord. A El, che era soltanto un villaggio, dicono che oggi girino macchine lussuose e che gli uomini mostrino monete d'oro tra i denti. Mio padre non sogna più una vecchiaia tra le colline, ricca di datteri e di latte. Sua madre ha lasciato un posto vuoto nella valle. Dicono anche che il litorale sia infetto e che i bambini nascano senza bocca. Da tempo l'ambiente naturale della costa veniva stravolto. Le ricchezze spazzate, l'equilibrio rotto. Potevi macchiarti di catrame camminando sulla sabbia o tagliarti con una nastra di alluminio. A noi raccontavano di ragazzi corsi in mare per la palla, assorbiti tra le onde in un batter d'occhi. Non erano i ginni questa volta i responsabili, né le sirene cannibali tra gli scogli, ma gli squali, i più terribili, i più voraci, certi giorni catturati e trascinati sulla spiaggia e poi calpestati dalla folla imbestialita. All'inizio degli anni '80 il lido di Mogadiscio fu travolto da una duplice tragedia. I soldi delle cooperazioni ci regalavano un nuovo porto e un macello modernissimo e automatico. le bestie decapitate e il sangue convogliato in direzione della Mecca. Per far spazio alle navi più grandi, molta parte della barriera corallina fu distrutta, mentre i veleni del macello venivano scaricati in mare. Dalla barriera spezzata, attirati dall'odore del sangue, gli squali entravano impazziti e si spingevano fino a riva. L'oceano, grosso di spugne e di conchiglie, dalle pozze multicolori di pesce farfalla, ora riportava solo corpi amputati e odore di morte. Il paese andava smembrandosi. Il suono dell'oceano, il suo flagore, è il leitmotiv della mia infanzia. L'oceano ribolliva come piombo fuso e poteva deformarti il cuore. Nella sabbia i tuoi piedi diventavano radici d'acqua e di iodio, le tue ossa crescevano di silicio e sale. Il mio oceano era una pozza di conchiglie rosse e di spugne impregnate, una cavità segreta di meduse e dollari di mare. Dopo il 1991, la guerra e l'esilio, Mogadiscio è per me una città di cui non ricordo le strade, una città piena di luci abbaglianti e di mura scavate. Per molti anni non ho visto il mare. La prima volta è stata a Sabaudia, a sud di Roma. C'era chi rideva perché pensavo che la marea si gonfiasse in poche ore. Non mettete il vostro telo vicino all'acqua o il mare lo porterà via. Le onde in Italia, mi dicevano, non si mangiano tutto. Il mare in Italia non si ritira neppure. Bisogna attraversarlo per accedere alla roccaforte. Bisogna attraversare il mare Mediano, mar Mediterraneo, il mare Bianco per gli arabi. In tanti affrontano il mare Bianco, ma delle mie coste sul Corno d'Africa, prima del mare Bianco, qualcuno sfida l'oceano su un sambuco. Vuole sapere se è proprio necessario arrivare tanto lontano. Se vai in riva al mare, molte donne vorranno raccontarti la loro storia. Alcune ci sono entrate nel mare e sono arrivate dall'altra parte. Alcune vorrebbero entrarci. Altre aspettano il figlio, partito da qualche giorno, o il fratello, o lo stesso amato. Guardano l'orizzonte e indicano ai bagnanti le vele o i motoscafi di passaggio. Vogliono sapere quanto può essere grande, quanti ne conterranno le stive e i ponti dei loro figli, dei loro amati, dei loro fratelli. Una donna rotea le braccia, le alza al vento e ride. Si chiama Dehebo e ha un'amica accanto a lei. Dicono siano inseparabili. Sono naufragate insieme e non entreranno mai più nel mare. Il sambuco era così pieno, c'era tanta gente, tutta in ghingheri, piena d'oro. Dehebo conosceva tutti e aveva detto loro di vestirsi leggeri. La barca si era ribaltata proprio vicino alla costa e tutti gridavano i nomi di tutti, afferrando quello che trovavano per rimanere a galla. Si era allontanata nel buio, perché lei sa nuotare, è nata a Baidoa ed è proprio nel fiume che ha imparato a nuotare. Si era allontanata perché chi sta affogando trascina con sé tutto quello che trova, pur di guadagnare un minuto di respiro. Era notte e sentiva le voci chiamare il suo nome. Poi una tra le altre si era fatta più vicina ed era l'amica con cui non era ancora così intima e la chiamava: aiutami, non lasciarmi morire. Dehebo era aggrappata a uno scoglio e aveva detto: ti aiuto, ma promettimi di non trascinarmi a fondo. Poi si era ributtata in mare per mostrarle la via. L'amica l'aveva seguita a nuoto e insieme avevano aspettato l'onda giusta che le spingesse sugli scogli. Dopo tempo che stavano distese, lunghe e assiderate, erano arrivate le motovedette e avevano acceso luci abbaglianti e vedendole bagnate e tremanti avevano chiesto loro di togliersi i vestiti. Allora, dice Dehebo, tenendo le mani a coppa sul seno, si era vergognata perché aveva dimenticato di mettersi il reggiseno prima di partire e i suoi seni non sono più quelli di una donna giovane e Dehebo si era trovata a petto nudo senza reggiseno davanti alle motovedette. Allora ripete ancora, continuando a tenere le mani sul seno. Lo dice sempre a tutte le donne, di non dimenticare mai di mettersi il reggiseno prima di partire.
So, of course, I encourage you to spend time with the site and to return to it again and again. And there's further details on all of the works there. I'd like to hand it over to Michelle and the conference folks if they have any end of day remarks or housekeeping items. I also wanted to say a special thanks to Doctors Christina Sharp and Andrea Davis, to the organizing committee, Leslie David, Canisia and Ronaldo, for this event, this joy, and these ongoing relations. Big congratulations to Dionne Brand for moving so many of us, like my colleagues and collaborator on this panel and in the digital project. I thank you all, and I thank you, Dionne, and congratulate you, and can't wait to see what the next few days bring. So is there any housekeeping items? We have a few minutes left if anyone has questions. Comments, stories. Okay, well, I encourage you to follow the link to the website and experience the works, and join us again tomorrow when we start our day. So thank you.